some of the budget letters showed up in our file.
Well, I would add on to what Paul said, and caution the committee on what we put forth as a recommendation, because with the testimony, there was a lot of, it should be a bigger body. There was also testimony in there pointing out that council has had provision as to take things out. With the testimony, there was a lot of recommendation. Small impact.
Well, the council did pass the bill, what was it, the CD, whatever, last week?
CD 46.
Yeah, where the TODs, they're exempting it. They passed it already. Yeah, so in all the TOD zones, the affordable housing is exempt.
And they did partial things that they would do, they didn't propose on because they haven't authorized more entry. So what they did was they made targeting. Yes, so contracts.
But most of the land that can be developed is in TODs. I mean, most of the remaining developable raw land is in TODs. So, you know, I think a large portion of that, as you say, is gonna be exempted because they just passed the.
Which don't cause concern, because if we have one test now that says wait, whether it works or not, and we take that test away, and we say, okay, now here's with a fee, and that fee can get dropped down either by bite or by who has to have to pay it. At some point, there's not gonna be a point in having schools tests, it's gonna be willy-nilly.
So that was something that we had talked about today, is that there is no way. It's either pay or no.
Well,
So there's
current
no-
outflow, there's a way. What
Right.
we're recommending is there no way.
Right.
So I'm
So
saying
that
we're
was-
taking that away, and then whether us or the county council starts taking away the UPB,
Right.
Then does it make sense for our recommendation? We say, quote, you know, a grants model for type of fees, saying the fee should be the, that could be one recommendation. It's not the, it could look like this, another recommendation would be at the level that we already made a recommendation for, another would be at some middle range. That way, the council would have, instead of looking at it as just one slide of numbers, they would be looking at, say, at some point in this thing, the argument has to be made that if, yes, we have to have sufficient voting. Rather than just saying, from our recommendation, we can do just this number, give them the range. We give them 2, maybe 3 recommendations of here's what the range of that looks like. Is that more for them? Yes. But does that get us, does that get AFO to a better place of arguing? To have that range in front of council, rather than us doing all of the pieces of trying to figure out what exactly will that number need to be for you to be successful if, you know, schools test, if yes, schools test, what does pay and fee, pay and losing fee? Yeah.
And just like the Supreme Court case, our best result can be just enough to meet the need. Cannot charge beyond that. So that high level.
Yeah, the high level would be.
Is what we want.
Yeah, that would be the just enough, you know, somewhere between just enough and what we've already recommended. It probably is, to your point, Paul, there probably is a half.
the development projects are gonna be smaller brownfield redevelopments. And I'm not sure. I don't think we have a good grasp like what actually to do with the numbers for the kinds of projects that come through. And the math on development projects that are brownfield is different because it also tearing down the structure is different than tree. And things like site selection and things that walking and then figuring out how to, integrate the property into existing forms. And missing uses that are around the property then be pretty even harder. And so, it's different on, let's finish that one. The kinds of projects we're gonna see in the next 10 years are different than the projects we've seen in the last 10 years. And I'm not sure how that's gonna shake out. What do you give us?
Yes, and then you.
Well, it just, there were testimony and Jeremy making, remember it, on two specific factors. And Jeremy said capital several times, and throughout the testimony, there were several people who were mentioning capital and operating. So I think I don't know if it's specifically needs, but we might want to keep that in mind in our recommendations, is that this is directed toward capital, not operating costs. And then secondly, there was also testimony in there about there's no guarantee that the money will actually go to the school system. And if it does go to the school system, is it additive or supplanting? So that's something that just sticks in the back of my head as well for people.
So that again, you said capital or.
Capital and not operating.
So are you saying that we should specifically that
End up in the schools. And we talked last time, difficulty broadly in school as opposed to. That's a different because then you're tying it too
Well,
much.
not necessarily locked out to say it's this school block, it's this school.
Right.
But one could argue that the school surcharge is dedicated for school.
Yeah.
The UPP is saying, well, here's a fee based on that. You could argue, well, it has to go to the school, but is there anything in the UPP process that specifically says this is for school? Or
I believe it does say it has to go to the school that's affected, that causes.
No,
Yeah, we got that. But I think the impression was that the money's always going to force it.
yeah, but we should just make that clear.
Okay, that's the impression you had. Make sure it does.
I agree.
and you don't know how the Local County is working. And you hope to look at it off and but it does turn into the and then the revenue source. Is there any guarantee it's not writing that revenue source goes to the new school or just, well, the revenue source, that's it.
I think everyone's assumption is that it's going to the school. But if we need to clarify that, fine.
I mean,
Jeremy, so. And then maybe look at the reflect back again some of the comments. Very finite, both oriented. We're not in the same space. No. We're not growing with the same characteristics as Apple has been up until now. I wonder if some of what we're hearing, public comment and even on discussion is almost, how do we shift ASCO responses to a maturing community more than it is to a community. And think of those don't go to the point. Would be into the education sessions, we get that. But does somebody who's just looking at, well, school budget is this, it's time when it's different. That factor into their head. So they're really that these activity centers are going to grow in population this amount or this amount, whereas other areas of people hear the difference between will be mature, which is debt. Flow is debt to control is this Should we be able to see a little bit more towards, or at least helping those who are also part of this process think of.
So I deal with these comments and, in regards to HFO, school facilities surcharge borrowers, because it's meant to deal with growth. If there's growth and there's inadequacy, that's a component. If there's no growth, but you're contributing a steady drain on resources, it's a factor. And obviously declining growth, it's not a factor whatsoever. What you're saying, there are areas, like a little HFO map, where you can build as much as you want, it's so crazy. There's no restrictions in some areas. But in regards to school funding, like transfer tax and federal grants, things to go over toward the operating side of the scale, we're just talking about mitigation for growth, period. That's the box APFO thing. It isn't a depth thing. It's about when you're growing, what you do to break even. It isn't about if you got a 100-year-old community from this old house and you're just doing renovations forever and ever. APFO wouldn't be a factor. It'd just be sitting in the wings in case something occurred. To Dan's point, yes, current school facilities surcharge is towards capital expenses, but there is an aspect that needs to be adjusted so they isn't misused. And you see a lot of people, and I get this, especially in PTA circles. Oh, APFO is just about capital. I'm worried about operating. Well, at some level, they do blend. If you fix all the leaks in the capital budget, in theory, apples to apples, you have the ability to fix your leaks in, or some of the leaks in the operating budget. If we can get APFO right from the beginning, where it doesn't create a negative draw on the communities, where it's net neutral, in theory, we should have a lot more resources to close our budget gaps like we have currently right now. And lastly, sorry, there was a lot of points we brought up here. We're talking about TODs and that's it. We got 256 square miles of Power County. It could be rezoned and top zoned every year toward Sunday. Who knows what it's going to be? HFO is dealing with the rate of it, be it zero, negative, or positive. But in the TOD districts, we're talking about, we just gave offsets to our fees, our breaking them fees. You do the math, it's just that simple. That eventually equates to coming out of capital expenses for the school system. If we do exemptions, they have to have an offset. Somebody else has to take up the load. Otherwise, it is a direct draw to the school system and children. And it exasperates them. We haven't even got to the last item, which is, even if we do this absolutely perfect, we still have the ethical dilemma of unlimited overcrowding they want. We aren't managing the impact to the children. And we've been hoping we did enough money in the right place at the right time to deal with these not passive ways of what's the basic approach, which we haven't talked to about missing middle and all the ADUs and all the other concepts that are coming in. And we're going to add density that we've never dealt with before. It's going to be a whole new level of craziness.
And they stood up when they had, and last month they established, maybe looked at Newtown zoning.
And that will be critical, but I mean, look, the ADUs, they show them as these granny flats and cute little things with flower boxes and grandmas in the backyard. What they aren't showing is, you could also take a place zone for a bunch of apartment townhouses and do 2x2s and double the density, because essentially everything's an ADU and you don't have to pay any fees or any tax, and you get all the downstream effects. You really got to watch for worst case scenarios. Because I guarantee you, if I were on the other side doing spreadsheets for whatever, enterprise housing, I'd be looking what's to my advantage and what I could get.
Sorry.
Enter the webinar panel as numeric.
Sorry about
handle,
that.
Followed by pound.
Just trying to get, we're trying to defend our community to make sure it isn't. I think the only ramble on that.
I was gonna say a couple of things I was curious about. One was characterized testimony, types, right? And then there was the people who.
Webinar panel.
But then the people who wanted.
Enter the
factor
webinar panel.
abstain. I think that has been too largely defined, because within that are the people who actually want to sign. Right. Yeah, so we have a couple little extra things to acknowledge, so to speak, and maybe the party, but, within saying that we were all about, we were saying, and I just want to have that, and we don't do the, there was that.
Really even heard.
Is there anything else anybody wants to say? Okay.
I would just say, based on the recommendation, we were talking about recommendation number one, which is UPP model. There's no verbiage in it that says the money goes to the school system.
So maybe
Wait,
that's
right.
something we need to add.
I think we all assumed it was. We made the argument about specific schools, but there's no verbiage to the school system. I think we all agree. we
And I
should.
think that was all
Yeah.
intent,
Yes.
that we all want that money to.
Did you-
and that money making
If
sure
it were
gets
spent
to
on
the school system.
operations, it could be legally challenged by those paying it. Because the rational nexus is for capacity.
Right.
Yes,
Not,
makes sense.
not that we don't want operations.
No, but no, I agree. Is
So
a
then,
legal challenge. there.
does our amendment or appendage, whatever, need to specify for school capital projects?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's what Dan had.
Yeah.
It's implied because it's based off a school surcharge fee, which should be, but if they consider that a different color of money, then
Right.
it could be
Should we
misappropriated.
just do that now?
It's already.
Reappropriated.
Well, we weren't gonna vote on anything tonight, so tonight, when we finish with this discussion, you're gonna go through the parking lot,
Okay.
but we're not actually gonna vote on anything till our next meeting.
Okay.
So today, we're just kind of reviewing I like to call it the listening, I like you said that, we call it a listening instead of a hearing. We're just reviewing that, and then you're gonna go through the parking lot stuff, just to refresh everybody's memory where we are. And then at the next meeting, we'll start voting again and working through this. So if anybody has any more discussion, let me know. Otherwise, we're gonna move on to the parking lot.
Okay, thank you. A while back, I had asked a couple of.
Were you-
Done.
Well, I know, is there anything else you wanted to talk about with the testimony?
Yeah, I
or-
know, I think that was my question.
I'm sorry, I thought you were.
No, yeah, no, because everyone said
I
no.
would say, one thing, there were a few in the testimony that was, the folks asked for if there could have been more communication from us
Mhm.
throughout, and, my brain went back and forth. I've done the research a bit where you go ahead and survey folks, and the hardest part of getting consistent communication is not the survey, but it's the analysis after the survey. So since I know we're being recorded, and folks are hearing, and I'm totally making myself a bug splat on the window for this. It would make maybe better sense, maybe next APFO, where we're doing some type of call to comments, where folks are using the mailbox a little bit more. Not us using the mailbox, but we're encouraging folks to give their comments via the mailbox a little bit more often than just waiting for public commenting
I
periods.
think they can do that very.
They
They
can, yeah,
really
yeah.
can, but some folks don't know until you say it aloud. Because I hear what folks are saying, because if you're looking at the time between our two public listening sessions, it's a lot to take in.
It is a lot, but it's also a lot of the same people. I noticed who came to the
Yes.
first one, came to the second one. So
Right.
what you find is you got a small core group of people who get involved, and everybody else just says, I'll just go along with what they do. So some people are just.
I can tell you something,
Yeah.
because I'm on HEC board, and as far as their testimony went, when they brought up that topic of responsiveness, I know that they were referring to this committee not being allowed to ask questions in the
In the
hearing.
hearing, yeah.
So that was like the specific.
That was the most entertaining part of the whole meeting. I
Just
laughed
so
out
you
loud.
know,
Oh, yeah,
that
no, that
that
is
is
well.
where that came from.
No, I get that.
FYI.
Oh, no, I totally get that as
Yeah.
well. You know, maybe
I'm just saying,
I would
it
love for
wasn't
us to
real.
have more comments.
Remember that guy.
No, it would be nice if the community was more involved, but there's 283,000 people in
18
Howard
people
County.
spoke.
And 18 people spoke. Right, I mean, that's like what, 1.0009% or something of the population is participating. So,
But it's a public hearing, and public hearings typically aren't dialogue. That's, I mean, even
Yeah,
how they.
this is public listen.
Right.
Yeah, we can do it, but that's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a fun.
Antoine, are you saying that if we had done a survey, that it would have been,
It would have been. net
what would have been
negative.
the issue?
It would have been net negative for us because we would have spent more time parsing the responses from the survey as a part of each meeting, rather than actually getting to recommendations. Should we encourage folks to respond, chat, use the inbox more? Yeah, sure.
Will
I
they?
think so. Will they is different story, but
We
we
have
should,
time for it.
we should probably, the sales brain comes in and says, we should call folks out and say, hey, you heard us during this meeting. Say something, leave something in the inbox. But I don't think a survey is the right use of, I don't think continued surveys, I should say it that way, is a good use of this committee's time, given how much education is needed every time that vote comes up, how much debate / tuning is needed.
So if there's anything else in.
Do we have it recorded somewhere that we're gonna do a motion at some point to amend UPP to,
Well, we can do that in the next meeting.
okay.
Yeah, because
We can throw that in our parking lot today too.
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So Lisa very nicely went through all the parking lot stuff and got it all organized for us so we can the next meetings going forward, we can get through the parking lot items or add things or edit.
So, thank you. A while back, Todd had asked to summarize the motions because there was this concern that there were so many and how we have time to even hear them all. And so the first thing I did, which is a previous document that was put in our file, and that's why we said update. So previously I had one that just kind of summarized topics into bins of motions that we could come up together and possibly hear. And make it look like a more palatable number we had left, right? And then what I did this time was I edited that to take out what would be really not relevant anymore, because we kind of already addressed the issue. And I reprioritized the order of things and added some motion numbers to like the first half, because I just found out I was doing this today, so I didn't finish the whole thing, but like the first half of the summary on the first page has way more detail. It's got like the person and the motion and, just kind of showing what each thing would be. I was asked to prioritize the motion.
I think we were asking this, that also the committee to prioritize these motions. Okay, Matt, I didn't want you to think it was just put on.
Sorry.
Okay.
I meant with the summary, putting first what could be related to our current system or the UPP system. So that we could get those out of the way first, because these happen to be the less complicated ones that take a little less time. So I put this first 5 on the first page because the committee could choose to hear those first for the 2 reasons of they tend to be a little less time consuming and because they could apply to either system. And then the second page, which I'm going to update further before our next meeting, with the details that are in this first page, are the things that were more complicated, more complex, going to take a lot more time to debate, monetary issues, fiscal changes, but also had things to do with our current system and not the UPP system. Because one of the things that I brought up before that I was concerned about addressing was that if the council doesn't pass this UPP, I think that it would be unfortunate for them to look at our recommendation list and not see anything regarding recommendations of how to amend the current system if they didn't pass the UPP. Okay, so to me, I felt like they're not irrelevant because we didn't pass the UPP to discuss them like at all. And my suggestion was that instead of listening to 20 motions about, say, what the percentages should be. Should they be 105, 110, 15? Should be that, Brent had proposed some ones that in the past, we could take a show of hands and say, how many want them the same? How many want them higher? And then just note that in our recommendations, so that at least there's something there. This is an example I'm just bringing up of a show of hands type situation where we could at least have a notation in our recommendations without going through 15 motions. Of, okay, this is how many people want this is how many people want that in like general ways. So that's another way that I sort of combine things to try to at least get some issues addressed at all versus having time to do all the rest of the motions. So do you want me to kind of go
Yeah.
through this first
Yeah.
page? I would appreciate it is okay to go through the first page. I don't mind going through the second page, but like I said, I really want to add more detail before our next meeting to this, because I didn't realize that we weren't gonna vote on anything tonight and that I was supposed to do the whole thing.
No, it's okay.
'Cause I thought we'd be voting tonight and I would just do this part,
No,
that was the short ones, but I apologize. So anyway.
Not at all, thank you.
Well, I think
Thank you.
yeah, go through the first 5 and let's see
Okay.
how far
Well,
we
that's
get.
what time it is, and we'll
Go from there.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. So on the topic of occupancy and capacity, with regard to reports, there's the feasibility study. The feasibility study is actually in the APFO ordinance. There are things that are required in it. It's like actually says certain things have to be in the APFO. So it's not like an APFO side topic. It is in the ordinance, some things that have to be done. And one of the things that is in there talks about having to discuss the sources of development impacts to enrollment, like the source of students, new development, resales, that kind of thing. And one of the things that I had proposed and others had also proposed within this first thing was to have new development, which is currently defined as occupancy permits from the prior school year up until like the feasibility study each year says that. So like the next year, it's the past 10, 11 months of occupancy permit. And then they don't stay new the next year. You know what I mean? Like it's a snapshot every year. So what you have as new in the feasibility study of development sourced enrollment is that brand new occupancy permit of that year. And it doesn't roll over and it's that snapshot every year. And so some people feel like, this was actually considered by the council and didn't happen a couple years ago, was that, okay, should we change that? Should it be 1? Should it be 2? Should it be 3? Should it be 5? Should it be 7? How much is new, right? And so one of the things I would like to see in the feasibility report is that they change that to 3. And there's 3 years is new. That's new. And we've heard things about people saying how long it takes to populate the project, and whatever, I don't want to argue all this. And so then, and Jeremy had, including spaces and students enrolled in preschool, regional special education, other programs, and put it in capacity, put it in the enrollment numbers. I also put in to maybe show the actual versus the projected enrollment in the study for 3 years. I mean, we'll have to see how doable all these things are and how complicated it would be to provide all these numbers. But that's what the feasibility study related motions were in this first piece. The second piece are various reporting.
Do you, can we, I still have some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Technically. Okay, so when you talk about the 3s, what does that get us? I'm just trying to understand, what is the 3 years? For
Okay,
that's
so-
meaning new, as at a new house.
It would be the past 3
No,
years
but
of
what does
new
that get you? What
occupancy.
does that help to establish?
It defines the enrollment that is sourced from brand new homes as being 3 years worth of brand new homes instead of one.
Okay, so not the age of the home,
No.
but you're getting 3 years
Well,
worth.
yeah, It'd
I
be
think it's-
basic home, because it would be built as an occupancy permit, so it's brand new homes. But it's considered new for 3 years instead of 1.
Okay, I think it's how it's written. Okay, I see what you're saying. So what you're saying is that that single home itself is not the new home for 3 years, but the source data, you're taking data from, let's say from here 25, 26, and 27 would be considered new housing as opposed to just housing from.
It goes by student, so
No,
like.
no, I understand. I didn't understand what you meant by
Yeah.
what you're considering a new home. You're talking about the amount of time that you would source the data, not necessarily the definition of what a new home is.
Right.
Okay,
Exactly.
that's what was misleading in how this was written, and that's what I didn't understand.
To your point, this all fundamentally goes back down to the school surcharge, which all the developers are very interested in. And there has been a mantra that's been going on for decades. New homes versus resales
Yeah.
is the term,
Yeah.
and what impact they have when you add a household to the system. The math doesn't work. We did the last school surcharge fee and we said 60% of the impact of new homes or impact of school growth comes from new homes and only, I'm sorry, 40% comes from new homes. 60% come from apparently the existing households are getting more and more denser every
That's
single
because of how they're
year.
doing
to
resale,
infinity.
everything over 1 year old.
But anyway, this mantra was used to extract a 60% premium or reduction in school surcharge fees for developers based on literally that statement. Now run that math through the sanity check. If we were to double the amount of houses in Howard County, according to that statement, according to that formula, we would have, or what is it, 40% of, no, 60% of the number of children that would come in from that doubling of the houses, all from existing households. You haven't built any new households, and yet you're assessing them for 40% of the impact regardless of the rate of the new growth that's being added into the
So
system.
now what I hear you say, just so I'm clear, is that say I buy a house and it's a brand new home, I built the home, like I went.
You are
to-
adding a household.
Right, and
to
I'm
Howard
buying
County.
that home. And say I hold on to that home for 12 months. And then I sell that home, you would not consider that a resale in this model.
Well,
You would
correct.
consider that.
It's irrelevant.
well,
It's-
Whether it's irrelevant or not, I'm just asking,
Yeah.
I'm defining it.
Sure,
In the definition, you would
the
still
the
consider
answer
that.
is yes. And then on the flip side, like right now, they're calling things resales that have never sold at all. So regardless of whether something really sold or not, or whether.
I was
it's
just trying to understand the
sell,
definition of
on
this,
both
because that's
ends,
where I'm lost.
You have things that won't be defined as actually sold or not sold.
Okay,
So what I'm trying to do is to say, let's forget about whether some, you know what I mean? You're just defining resales that when the house is made, never sold, and you're defining new as only 1 year old. And
so you're saying, okay, so, all right. Okay,
a
I'm
brand
sorry to
new-
be so
a brand
dense.
new
but
house is 3 years.
0 to 3 years. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I was
A
getting.
brand new unit that never
Oh,
existed
okay.
before, stays brand
Thank
new
you
for
for
3 years.
That's what I wanted
And
to
if it's 3 years
understand.
old, we're saying
So
it's
then it's
not
subject
new
to a
anymore.
UDP, is that what we're saying?
No,
No,
just, this is just for
that.
Just for that.
Just
It's
for
for the
I'm
purchase,
just
so
for
it doesn't
data
have to
It
be-
relates to
Okay.
the premium on the school
But,
surcharge.
but the thing is, just to be clear, I want to answer this concern. This has dominoes, because you are defining the sources of enrollment. And when you start arguing about the source of enrollment being X, Y, Z, and it's not accurate, it has an effect on making policies.
And then our source of enrollment starts at, so like for this year, we're on year 20, FY 28, year 28, 2028, as opposed to
Right.
fall of 25.
Mhm.
So then with this, you're suggesting that we would also
It goes from 1 year to 3.
so we would have 25 as a
I'm just
base
talking about the
year.
feasibility study.
You
The
understand?
feasibility study will say our new students this year from new development are occupancy permits
At
for
25.
3 years old, 2 years old, and 1 year old,
Okay,
instead of just 1 year old.
Is
That's it.
okay.
is that because people are moving? I mean, like this is kind of what we did. We moved to Howard County, but we didn't have kids for a few years. Like, is that the idea that you're going to capture the kids that are like the students that are generated?
Populate right away
Right.
fully either.
Okay.
It's sort of like you're calling a brand spanking new home, new development, when it's like, that house wouldn't have been there forever if you hadn't built it, right? And so you're only calling it your source, your project is sourcing this many students only for the 1 year. But it's not true that students aren't coming from that project for only 1 year.
They're prorated.
Well, it's that first year they're not, but they will.
But it's not fair to call it new forever, so what is fair? I don't think one is.
Yeah, okay.
I wanted to say something, and then we're gonna go to Dan.
Yeah, guys.
So we talk a lot about single-family homes, and I'm always thinking about, as you guys know, that as an example for what can happen with redevelopment, how we're considering those units. So especially when a lot of them are rentals and they're generating students. So how are we factoring those numbers also into the feasibility study, the new versus, and I agree with you that having data over a longer period of time will give us more accurate numbers to base the impact of a project on and potential future impacts in the surrounding area, like even up their middle and high school, that can give some time to work with. But I guess I get a little bit stuck thinking about how we apply that to a rental scenario, like the one across from Swansfield. It's going to be the same situation. They're going to increase the number of units. I don't know the details on that project, but how will we be factoring in the yield from that project? How would we do that for rentals?
Dan, when there's an occupancy, I'm sure that the school system has their own way of analyzing rent versus purchases with occupancy permits versus new kids coming in from new rental units. There's still occupancy permits on a new rental unit. It would just be new versus.
We get a new UNO established with that, and we do the change. So we look at what has been already there before, and if there's an increase.
Yeah, but that's an increase of actual units.
Correct.
Yeah, we're only
Right,
talking
no.
about building new units.
Mhm.
I mean, I get your point, but I'm just talking about what this motion was about.
This is just a matter of what question are you asking? APFO is not supposed to deal with an existing household with a in perpetuity resale occupancy, and so on. It's not meant for that component. It's meant for what happens, what is the impact, what is the mitigation when you add an additional household or an additional unit to the system, which in turn will generate children in perpetuity afterward.
Which an apartment complex that was smaller to begin with, that has been expanded, is going to do.
So if it adds units, it's adding households. That's an
Mhm.
APFO
That would
thing.
be-
If it's a net zero, yeah, technically it may ebb and flow, but that's not what APFO is meant to deal with. And Dan's numbers are actually beautifully accurate. It's just when you intermix these two concepts of what's the impact of an additional household versus what is the ongoing fluctuations in an existing home. That's not APFO.
But I think,
It's
but there's
this side of the equation.
there's a juxtaposition of the two items that go into it just from the standard point of projection. Because if you look at new alone, no school is closed. But when you look at new with the capacity of the school, which takes into account the existing students, the survival rate ratio, the resale of houses, all that kind of stuff, it all comes together. So it all has to be done and melded together. You can't just be looking, and yes, the APFO does the UPP or the school surcharge on new, but you can't separate the items because they all build into that.
They have to
projection.
work toward X, which is adequacy.
Yes.
That is the ultimate outcome of it.
Sorry, I just want to clarify one thing, but if we're adding units to something that was already existing, and I'm not super familiar with the occupancy permits, I know you tried to explain it to me one time, and it clearly is not in there still, but let's say we went from 50 to 100. So there were 50 existing, and there was some number of trackable students from within that 50 units, right? So then we're adding 50 more. Are those only considered the
Yes.
new?
Right.
Yes,
That's right.
but you're adding 50 units, which are generating on average countywide 0.45 students per unit.
Right, which in this
And
case,
And depending on
In
the
per-
kind of unit it is it a studio? Is it a
Well,
one-bedroom
okay,
apartment? Is it
two different things. In perpetuity, we just said average across the whole county.
Yeah.
That equates for apartments, townhouses, trailers, UFOs, and everything in between. That isn't what we're solving for there.
Mhm.
What we're saying is if you add an additional unit, you are adding a load in perpetuity. You can calculate it by square foot or estimate of number of students generated and all that other stuff, but ultimately it comes back around to, can you actually forecast what the impact of a new home will be and ensure that no matter where it is, you have an adequate amount of school capacity for the children that reside in there?
You can only do your best. You can't guarantee anything, you know, and I think that all the numbers we've seen, there's a lot of people who do this for a living day in, day out, and gave us a lot of really good information. And they did say if it's a studio or a one bedroom or what have you, that this is what it generates. But your question was, if you have, like what happened to you across the street, there were a certain number of units. When they tore it down and they rebuilt it, there were more units. So what would be affected by the UPP or the school surcharge would only be the difference. My understanding is from what was there, subtract what was added. So in your case, if there were
Say it's
100,
50.
it would be 50, right?
Right.
So that's what's affected, right?
And those numbers, and so Lisa, what you're proposing is that the new would be considered for 3 years. So there would be those 50 units and be counted
Those
under
50
that.
unit students who live there, defined as new to the school system from
Mhm,
them, would be defined as new
mhm.
for 3 years
3
instead
years.
of 1 on this 50 units. And Dan, I completely agree with you. And this isn't about projections, Lily. You obviously, for projections, you must include ratios and new and everything to have appropriate projections. But this isn't about projections. This is about labeling within the projections, about calling new some semblance of rational amount of time that the house is new. But just because it ends up having an effect on policy.
And just trying to clarify, oh, go ahead. One.
So if we get into that detail of a discussion, I would like to invite Tim Rogers back to this, because this has been a point of discussion from year after year after year. First thing I would point out is that the projections do take into account the anticipated, it's anticipated because we have seen developments change their pace, but it takes into the account the anticipated development of individual houses. So, and maybe you're not talking this way, but the way I'm hearing it is you're saying this development is providing 50 houses. So for 3 years, 50, but the projections take into account only 10 houses are going to be developed this first year. Next year, another 15 houses. So that's already baked into how the development is done. One question I would ask is if you could let me know, because maybe I overread it and didn't read it, but where in APFO is specifically feasibility study noted?
It is Title 16, Section 1103, C.
I want to make sure because everybody should be aware. Feasibility study is right.
For years.
Everybody heard that.
She said feasibility.
Everybody
studies going
needs to be
away.
aware feasibility study is going away.
That's
The
big.
feasibility study is being replaced with the educational facilities master
Master
plan.
plan.
So the
which
data
they
and
told
everything
us,
is
right,
gonna
they
be
told
there,
us that.
but feasibility study,
So
it
what
will
we're
no
seeing
longer
with
be an
that.
answer.
You're doing
is
EMFP.
with this data and
You're doing your
figure out what we
EMFP.
need.
Yeah.
It's off the press.
I just wanted to kind of clarify one point that we've been
Yeah, sure.
bumping around. You're not taking issue with the projection
No.
or the projection methodology.
No.
You're just saying within those projections, the amount of students that are coming from resale versus
Yeah.
new,
Absolutely.
that's what you're taking.
Yeah, I'm saying.
So if you were to look at the projections and you were to say, hey, here, I want to count 3 years.
Yeah,
You would essentially be raising the number of kids, of students who are coming from new construction, but then lowering the number of students that are coming from resale because now you're counting
Yeah, you
more
can't count
things
them
at
twice.
resale
Right,
as new.
right.
But then, but it would net to zero.
yeah, there
In
wouldn't
what
be
you're
a
looking, in
difference.
theory.
There wouldn't be
Well-
a difference in the number of students. It would be the bucket they're in.
Yeah, just.
But with-
And the phasing isn't an issue either, because it's not in the system as a new occupancy permit until it exists. So the phasing isn't an issue either. It's just how long do you call that kid from a new development?
This concept relates to, like I said, a 60% discount on the school surcharge right now. And if you look at all the math, guess how much we're off when we were calculating UPPs? Exactly 60%. We're actually pretty good with countywide averages, per square foot averages, per unit. We don't have to be
No, I'm sure I started the question, but.
it's that component that Jeff
Yes.
brought out,
Yes.
resales versus.
Given what Dan just said, because we are changing to educational facilities master plan, I would make a suggestion that we do make a recommendation to update the code for that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's a little technicality, but that might not be a bad adjustment to make.
Well, I'll relook at this as well, but C3 and 16.113 talks about the school capacity chart.
Mhm.
I'm still looking for the words feasibility study.
What did you call that? The EMP?
Educate,
EFMP,
EFMP.
Educational Facilities Master.
I'm just making notes about.
Dan, are there components related to capacity and utilization in that where that would be an official
Yes,
source?
so essentially what has been the annual feasibility study is being taken as a large part and put into the educational facility master plan. And it's not a surprise to anybody, but we went through the whole process of coming up with a facility prioritization process and all. That's in there as well. So what used to be the feasibility study is now a big component of the EFMP. So yes, the projections, the methodology, all that stuff is in there.
Did that change since Tim came and talked to us?
It's new this year.
A lot of
Did he
other
talk to us about it?
jurisdictions call it that way, call it that. That's how I was
He
familiar
didn't
with
talk to us
it.
about that? So maybe we could ask him to put something together that we could share with the group about that, because I don't remember him talking about
No, It's a lot of other I've heard it called the EFMP in other jurisdictions. I know
But we
it's-
always submit an EFMP. The state requires the EFMP to be submitted by July 1st.
Mhm.
Typically, what we have done is taken the feasibility study
Mhm.
and then added the other state requirements, which are a bunch of forms, and adding in the individual policies and all that kind of stuff to create the EFMPs. So we're just, instead of doing separate documents, it's combining it once into the EFMP and submitting that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ironically, the official source for our numbers for our current APFO will be changing and will need to be reflected. However, if the UPP thing passes, we're going to need an official source to base the school surcharge fee, which there's a multiplier on. So again, would that be sufficient, or do we have to change some of our math?
Because we're basing it on capacity, right? We're basing it on the capacity of a school near, projected near a project. So will we still have those numbers to factor in?
Yeah, so the EFMP in taking over the space of the feasibility study does not stop the school capacity chart for APFO. That is still required by ordinance and is still done as a separate report.
Right.
So
It just won't be like
EFMP
released
feasibility-
publicly like it always is.
Oh, no, it's still, yeah, it's
Okay.
still taken to the Board of Education. It was done this year.
Mhm.
I forget the actual date, but it was done this year, taken to the board. It's actually
It was just introduced
CR
Monday.
113, I think, with the county council. But that will still happen every single year. And it's still based off of the projections and everything. It's the third year out because you have to take into it, and there has been recommendation to use literally the next year, but developments don't happen the next year, which is why the third year out is still maintained for the test year.
So there won't be that component inside a feasibility study anymore. Or will that chart find its way into
It is still there.
into the EFMP?
It is still there.
Okay.
But we have to, and this might be a conversation to have, which we can add to the parking lot. And I hate to drag this on further, but there has been, especially by Ms. Walsh, a lot of conversation over the years regarding the projections that are shown in the feasibility study versus the projections that are utilized for the APFO chart. And the difference between them is the APFO chart is always the end of the process, end of the capital budget. So the APFO chart projections are essentially a year old. Because you do the projection, you go to the Board of Education, that informs the capital budget recommendations. The board has to then approve what those capital budget projects are, which then informs the APFO chart. So you can see how they're separated by a year. So the APFO chart you see this year are not going to be the same projections that you see in the EFMP. But the chart's still there, but the numbers will be different. So if we want to, as a group, because I would not be surprised if Ms. Walsh does not ask when this report goes, why was this not discussed? if we want to discuss the timing of the APFO chart and what projections are used, that might be something for us to discuss in a future meeting.
All right, well, I
That
think
probably
people
confuses you.
understand the general gist of those types of motions that were combined in this first part. So like later, when we go to debate and vote it, people will know what this is about. And then I mentioned the other ones that were in here, and we're gonna move on. Okay, so there were a lot of motions that had to do with reporting. And I separated out the ones that could not apply to UPP with the current system, so you're not gonna see all the reporting ones here, but these are the ones like this. And you know, these kind of speak for themselves. If you wanna read it. Brent had a few. Todd talked about not rounding up on the capacity chart percentage numbers. And I apologize about talking about the capacity chart and the feasibility study at the same time. But anyway, and Todd said to rename the surcharge fee to developer impact fee. Brent had a status report in here, so those are a few there. Should I continue?
Yep.
Okay.
Number 3.
So exemptions, there's a lot of different exemptions. And they could apply to either UPP or current stuff. These kind of speak for themselves as well.
Now, when you did paragraph 3, did you take into account some of the laws that were just passed for ADUs and the affordable housing and TRDs? Did you take that into account?
No, because I figured that that's gonna stand, and what we're recommending is for stuff that doesn't apply to them. I mean, it might change people's feelings about how much is already being to them. They want to exempt more, but as far as what we would be exempting, it would be, you know, things that aren't already.
Yeah, I just didn't want to recommend something that's already been handled by
Yeah.
law
Uh-huh.
and, you know, or try to recommend something that was against one of the 2 things that have been passed, one state, one local, that affect these things, ADUs and affordable housing. So I just want to make sure that when we present it, that we are mindful of those things.
Exemptions either to UPP or in the current system, like the school, one or the other. I believe we can define what's minor.
ADUs
regardless of
are,
those laws.
oh, sorry, ADUs are already exempt from APFO,
Mm-hmm.
but they would not be exempt from the UPP because it's at square footage, so
Exactly.
just
The
FYI.
charges versus
Right.
the school.
Right.
And this could apply to either one.
Correct.
Yeah, it's just the
different
APFOs.
ways. And
Right.
so,
APFO test, are they exempt?
All of them,
All of them.
statewide, it was passed,
But not even before that, we never looked at ADUs because they're attached.
yeah. Well,
We
Moore
don't have
signed that bill.
right, but we don't have detached accessory
Mhm.
dwelling units. So if anyone added an accessory dwelling unit, we didn't test that for
Mhm.
adequacies against schools.
Mhm.
I did recently find out that, if you build one unit on a pre-existing lot, there is no school. That's.
That's correct. Yes.
So an ADU would pretty much be that. Building a unit on it, but.
No, because it's an
but it's sort
accessory
of the
to,
second one
it's
instead
not-
of one.
that would be a primary, I mean,
Keep in mind, the
accessory.
definition of an ADU can also be, you finish your basement and you put a kitchen.
Correct.
You finish the room over your garage and it is a kitchen that makes a house a house. It is a stove technically
Right.
that makes a house a house.
Okay.
So the minute you put a stove in a kitchen, it's a house. If you have a finished basement and you have everything but a stove, it's not a house. It's the stove that makes it a house, technically speaking, for appraisal purposes, et cetera. So ADUs they might not necessarily be a separate building. It can be a part of the house that is finished.
An attic conversion or basement conversion.
That is an ADU, right?
Yeah, we don't allow detached ADUs in Howard County,
Yeah.
but an
Yeah.
attached ADU. And even if it's offset from the house, but we don't consider even the offset as an
Mhm.
additional dwelling,
Mhm.
to meet any adequacy
Right.
standards.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot in the community of wanting to
Right.
do these ADUs
Mhm.
in our comprehensive
And
zone.
you do have to be owner occupant. You can't do them as an investment.
Not really.
It has to be owner occupant.
Yeah, and probably that would stay for Kate's Landing, but.
Two is up for debate.
What I mentioned, the reason I mentioned that is because if you define in APCO exemptions what minor is, like in the subdivision, and if you say, hey, it's 4 or less, you're not gonna.
And that is defined in
In
subdivision.
minor, as a minor subdivision, but I meant, if we use that same thing to say minor is exempt from APCO, then that would automatically include ADUs just by definition, because it's one, even if it is one more, right, or not. But anyway, I just pointed
Okay.
that out because in combining these motions, I wanted to make sure that people understood that they were being captured in what they wanted to do, like yours, for instance. You mentioned the ADU, so I kind of wanted to make sure people understood why I combined them.
On this one,
Mhm.
from the top, you had said these would be relevant because they would be the same regardless of UPP versus traditional.
Well, they could be applied to in one way or another, to either.
And I'm just thinking that as we talked about the UPP, we really sought to, I think, limit exemptions.
Oh, I
So
know,
they would be two different worlds.
they're different types of exemptions in here.
Okay.
So I
We
think-
said senior, we said,
What she's thinking is let's say we take the UPP model to the council and they say no, that there are these other things that would apply, even if they hopefully maybe think about enacting, even if they don't
Okay.
accept the UPP part.
like this
right?
could be either one. Page 2 is more just
Yeah.
the old
I
system
think
for the
that's,
most
I
part.
think that's.
Yeah, just the old system.
I would encourage everyone, though, there's ADUs as is, but there's ADUs as proposed. Think of the worst case scenario and how we can prevent an issue with adequacy.
There are no ADUs proposed by the county right now. So I guess what is being proposed?
I've been to like 10,000 DPZ meetings where we've had presentations on ADUs and all the possible combinations that we could
But there's
have
not
in the
been-
community based on the general plan.
Only in the general plan, but nothing formally has been proposed for regulations. I just want to be careful and saying that there has been a formal regulatory proposal on the table because there has not been.
Well, I'm going to go the other way. There have been many proposals to implement that legislation, so we have to be mindful that that could be coming.
Okay. Number 4? Are we on 4? Are we on 4? Thank you.
Okay, there were some motions that had to do with, changing the committee meeting issues, in the future for FO.
Frequency.
Yeah, how often and is the main thing here, yes.
Okay.
And I had talked about comprehensive rezoning, how, you have the general plan, comprehensive rezoning is supposed to implement the general plan. We're having a larger gap than we've seen in a very long time between those than we normally had in the past. And so some people are concerned, like, okay, we're doing this APCO review, but we're gonna have comprehensive zoning, and it's going to be a while away, so like, shouldn't we do APCO again, maybe? After that, or right before that, or somewhere around that,
Right.
because usually this all happens around the same time. Like 10 years ago, you had the general plan, you had the APCO, you had comprehensive, boom, boom, boom. And it all was relatively within like a 2-year span, and they're told that the's gonna be a delay in comprehensive zoning.
Well, but I would suggest this is also the first time that, that the APCO committee had to be stood up in a certain way after the general plan. So a little bit of a different timing. So anyway, I just, wanted to point that out as
Right,
well.
it was longer before it started this time
Yeah,
too.
yeah. So,
Absolutely.
But wasn't the FO convened because of the general plan?
Yes.
yes, and there were specific code requirements regarding timing after, so.
But it was right at.
It is within the,
Yeah.
I understand it.
Oh, yeah, and then, I think Brendan said review at least one part annually, and then everything every 4 years, like maybe we could have, like, I wish they would do comprehensive zoning this way. It's like, do this piece and this piece, not everything at once. Like, that was a suggestion for that. So there's those 2 things. Okay, number 5, and this kind of goes into the adding new things to FO, but there's a lot of that. But anyway, that Aaron and I were talking about looking at a fire station EMT type thing for large projects. Just with the concern that large amounts in one area, not overwhelming a fire station. Because it takes
But part of the fee is dedicated to fire. So,
all of it that I'm saying here.
right,
What do you
right.
mean,
But
the
I mean,
fee?
some of the
Which
money
fee?
is collected
The other one, yeah. The other one.
already is designated to go
Sure.
to fire. So you're saying on top of that,
Only in these fairly large
over
areas
300.
pushing in one districted fire station.
The transfer tax is a smoking mess, or, in that it has operations and capital intertwined in there, and it isn't proportioned anyway, so it's not the same as other
Yes.
fees.
Mhm.
So fire
And
surcharge
only-
fee, like a school surcharge
Well,
fee?
right, except it's, it's only
Okay.
pinpointed for, here's what the response times are lacking. And here's all these that are coming. So just trying to be very
Okay.
strategic.
Yeah, okay, I think I get it now. Okay, so if threshold,
Right,
if over threshold,
Right.
if development's happening in, it's over this threshold,
Mhm.
fire EMS fee.
yeah.
Okay.
It
brain
just the thought of
knows that.
like safety for a really large inundation that's expected in one area where you're already seeing before they're coming this lower response time. Let's get money directly to build another fire station.
Do we have a standard response time metric?
There
This
is,
metric
It's a
is-
metric,
I
but
was
it's not
told-
standard.
This metric I pulled out of what
Yeah.
triggers them to do analysis to expand.
Okay.
and NPFRM is the national standard for fire departments, and they have their response time metrics for first due. And that is
Is that the one we,
that's what we should be using.
Okay.
What you get, if you look at the budget hearings, is a very cheesy heat map with a little colored circle
Yeah.
that is not showing the actual deficiencies in the system.
so recommendation could be using that measure as the threshold.
It is very well regarded around the entire nation. It
So-
is an arbitrary.
So maybe that's a good time for you to make a note, so when we come to this in the voting, you can, you can bring that.
Yeah, I'm sussing that around, but yeah, definitely.
And my recollection from the fire folks was that it's the 55+ communities that are really adding to the calls. So I made myself a little note to maybe make some sort of notation there that if it's 55+ community of a certain size, maybe they don't pay for the schools, but maybe they pay for the fire, because that seems to be, according to the fire department, what these 55+ huge communities do is they generate a lot of calls. So
Lorian does not have its own ambulance fleet, and it's our highest call
yeah,
center.
so maybe instead of them paying for schools, right, because they're not gonna be doing that, maybe, we think, just something to think about,
That's a
right?
great point.
And look, NPFRM or something very close to that.
Thank you.
Okay, do you want to go on to we still have a little bit of time, we could go on to number 6. So my question to the group would be, do we want to try to get through all 10 of these before 8 o'clock? Ms. Ross?
Let's keep chugging.
All right, well, let's keep going till 8, I guess.
One thing I'll mention about number 5, and when I was gonna edit this the second time, I was gonna add several motions for new tests. Paul wanted a bike test, Aaron wanted the ER tests, Beckon Parks test, Brent had a storm drainage test. So there were like new tests to add to APO as a separate little combination of things. I'm gonna add that to this when I edit that. Sorry about that.
Okay, Antoine, did you have a question? Did you have your hand up?
I did, and I just found it's in FPA
Thank you.
1710 standard.
Got a little dyslexic. We get the point.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, on to number 6.
Okay, there were a bunch of motions and as you recall, I said that for the rest of these, I didn't actually have the time today to enter all the names and numbers, but I'll be doing that. There were a lot of allocation type motions proposed, and some of them fell into this description. No allocations are available. Let's have a pilot program to help let them have them, possible amendments there, all kinds of details could be changed.
And one thing with the allocations, we have to be
Carryovers.
careful of, Lisa, is that those allocations come from the general plan.
Mhm.
And so that would be also amending HOKA by design. So just if you make that as a
That's a
recommendation,
really good thing to
We do
reference
that
with
every
these
year.
proposed motions, that they would.
we
fit.
don't amend HOKA by design for that allocations chart itself. So just,
The allocations chart is a piece of legislation every year that the council.
I
can
understood, but
change.
we're not changing, like
Right.
adding new
Oh, yeah.
tests, new programs to it. So I'm just saying that's. That would have to be, I would just say it's a little more than that, I think, for adding a pilot program that would have to come out of HOKA by design. Yes, I understand what you're saying, but we're not, the way this is written.
It's just one of the motions.
Right, so I'm just saying with that, if you make that motion, that's what would have to go along with that particular thing.
Okay, thank
There,
you.
there are some detailed things that can be done each year. I have seen the council do changing carryovers.
That would,
Things
right,
like that.
that's right.
Yeah.
But to me, this reads as like, are we now gonna be offering up a whole pilot program? Would be a recommendation coming out of the plan, so that's why I'm just cautioning with that.
The other elephant in the room is the $300 affordable housing units, which resides in that same pool. So at some point, there may be some poking fingers in the pie there, the general plan.
I'm
Number
gonna,
7,
I'm gonna skip 7 and do the other 3.
Okay.
So much faster.
right? That's good.
So,
Good choice.
now remember, this page has to do mostly with the current system. And one of those show of hands things I was talking about is number 8.
Oh, mhm.
That- That's what I was talking about earlier, that, we could do a show of hands and at least have it in the recommendations to address, if we have the old system, what do people want to see those capacity percentage to be? So that's what 8 has to do with. And then 9 would be a very similar thing with the wait time being 4 years, right now. And then another thing that was over several motions were, if we don't have UPP, which takes this thought into consideration already, but in the old system, it's one size fits all system. Like everybody pays the same, everybody waits the same, and it's all just based on the capacity chart. And some people wanted, if we were going to edit the current systems, some people wanted to see that types of units would have to wait or pay differently than other types of units, because those units, some units produce more students than
Can you
than
define
other
types of
units.
units?
Well, like an apartment versus a single family home.
So would you say types of unit based on number of bedrooms?
That makes sense as well, but you can have an apartment with 3 bedrooms, for a kid than a single family home that's really tiny. But yeah, I mean, there's all different ways to define them, and the motions were a bit general, that a unit defined as a type that produces a certain number of students. There's different units that are notated as producing more.
Mhm.
And within that system of how the school system says these units are producing certain numbers of kids, there's like a fairness factor of like, well, shouldn't the people who are putting more kids in per unit pay more or wait longer or whatever? So that's what that has to do with. And I just wanted to remind everyone and the people watching that all the stuff I'm talking about are not my emotions. Like all these things, I'm even saying things that probably are contradictory because I'm describing everyone's emotions.
Yeah, you just did a synopsis.
Yeah, no,
of everything.
thank you for doing that. And we didn't want to put you on the spot. I did call her ahead of time. We had a discussion.
I had some time to do
And
this.
Lisa, to your point, we should all do our homework. I've heard unit type mentioned about 500 times in land use things. People are obsessed with unit type, but we already have a school surcharge fee based on square foot, which is a rational comparison. Again, this is changing standards. If we change the standards, is it a net gain, net loss, net neutral, or more appropriately, does it get us to adequacy? And so I hear a lot of, if we only change it to this, it'll solve everything. No, unless we have it solve X, it's just a change.
But I think there's a big difference in selling or somebody buying a house that's, let's say 2,200 square feet, and it's a senior, and let's say it's even not a senior, and, you know, they only have 3 bedrooms instead of 4 bedrooms, because you can have, like, what's the smallest it can be to be a bedroom, 9 by 10 or something like that. So that's the smallest it can be and technically be a bedroom. So you could have the same, this is why the square foot throws me, because you could have the same square foot, but you could have 5 bedrooms in 2,200 square foot here and only 3 bedrooms in 2,200 square foot there. And your chances of having more need or, you know, put onto all our systems are gonna be the one with the 5 bedrooms, right? Just like when you get septic, it's based on number of bedrooms. So you could technically have a 3-bedroom house with 20 bathrooms, right? Because that's not what they're looking at. That's not the qualifier. So I have to say that I think looking at number of bedrooms, to me, makes more sense than just
I agree.
square foot.
You're bringing up a recurring theme. Let's pick 2 standards and what brings somebody to an advantage and somebody to a disadvantage. Ideally, we should be
I'm not trying to do a
solving for
win-lose
adequacy
situation.
with either
I'm
standard.
not looking for a win-lose situation. I'm looking for a situation of accuracy. That's what I'm looking for. And in the situation where you look at how many bedrooms, because there is a formula based on, it's like 2.25 people is the maximum that can be in every bedroom. So if you have a certain number of bedrooms, you know that's going to be a maximum amount of people, in theory, you know. So I'm looking for accuracy.
You're
not
bringing up a
win-lose.
beautiful point. Let's calculate which would be more accurate and make our recommendations based on that.
Right, which is what she's
Just
saying.
to say that the motions that are referenced in the type of units here, they are talking about not changing our system to have a different surcharge
Right.
device measurement, but to actually just take the system and have either a discount or a surcharge based on what kind of units you're making.
Right.
And this was, of course, proposed before we had the UPP
Yep.
thing,
Yeah.
so it would, this is only.
This would be one of the things if the UPP wasn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So number 7, do we want to?
All right.
Number 7 is.
Yep, we're
where
going
I
back,
put-
okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, say it again.
No, I didn't know, I thought we had done all these, okay.
Well, I
great.
skipped
what
7.
you skipped
Oh,
is-
sorry,
I'm coming
okay,
back to 7
okay,
because it's
gotcha,
the
all
same
right, thank you, okay, sorry about
Figured we might
that.
as well be sure to get the other ones finished. So number 7 is where I've done all of the incredibly complicated money, usual, typically fiscal stuff is in here. And some of these things would be debatable
Oh.
and even, maybe even not able to be done without a lot of other input and understanding of how other systems are working in our county. So, these kind of speak for themselves. Like I said, I'm gonna put more detail in them for next time. Some of them have to do with side APFO recommendations, like let's have the council ask this, be enabled by the state to do X, So that's where the state stuff is noted. You had talked to me, Linda, about certain things you thought would not even be able to be done versus things that are already done. If you wanted to look through that and mention that to the committee, that would be really helpful. I think you were talking about define APFO fleet, central office storage, had mentioned about.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we were just talking about like how challenging to have APFO, have fleet, central office storage, capital expenditures for infrastructure. I mean, it almost require a whole nother department, similar to a budget department, to be an APFO department for that. So I just think there would be a lot of challenges operationally for the county to be able to manage some of that. So,
So does this help everybody feel like you're prepared for our next meeting where we will be voting on recommendations?
I have one question. So we've already recommended these things. Is it our job, and I'm just asking, to have a fail-safe in place?
So
in case
so
we
these
don't
are
like
things
it?
we haven't voted on.
No, I agree, but some things have come up like, what if they don't like this recommendation? Should we have a plan B? Is that our job to have another plan?
Yeah, well, I don't know
I'm
that it's necessarily a
I
plan
don't even know if
B.
it's feasible, time constraints.
Yeah, no, I don't know that it's necessarily a plan B, and I think that some of these things could apply. I don't think we should offer a plan B.
I
I think we have to say this is.
We
what
actually
we-
did have a plan. That's what we did with the UPP. So my answer to that question for you is that when people came into this committee meeting, they were gonna make motions about AFO. AFO was, is what it is right now. And we have suggested an alternative of a big piece of it, right? And this is partly summarizing so that we can address, to make people feel heard who have motions that they want to be heard. And so, okay, how do we get the most people to be heard? We combine them, we try to make time for combining them so that people don't feel like, well, if I want to edit the current system, if UPP doesn't pass and they have nothing for the current system, all my motions aren't gonna be heard. Like some people will feel
No,
that
that
way
makes
in the
perfect
committee,
sense.
so they kind of
But what,
want to be heard.
are we talking about that recommendation number one? Or we're talking about recommendation 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 also?
Well, no,
having
this,
an alternate.
this whole page is mostly.
Oh, no, I agree with that. I'm just saying in general, we've made 10, 11 recommendations.
Mhm.
Should we be worrying about alternate if the committee says we don't like this,
No, not for everything. I
just for
agree.
number one?
It's just like, for instance, percentages.
No, I
That's a
totally,
huge thing.
no, I
It'll take
agree.
10 minutes, you know?
Okay, fair enough. Well, I mean, there's a lot of recommendations on the board.
Yeah.
And given the time restrictions,
And,
obviously,
yeah.
recommendation number one is what we spent the most time on, and I totally agree with you. But where do we draw that line, I guess? And I'm asking the question too, from ignorance. Like, I don't know, what's our role here in that regard?
Well, and I don't think it shouldn't be, oh, we have to give a certain number of recommendations. I mean, I'm for quality, not quantity.
Yeah.
So I would rather just give them some really good things to chew on
Yeah.
instead of like, you know, throw the spaghetti up against the wall and see what sticks. You know, I mean, I've found over the course of my work life that that doesn't work. To find the things that work for you and then do them over and over again, you know, and tweak them as you go. So clearly this committee has said that UPP is what we want to present. And maybe before next week, it would be a good idea for everybody to go through and look at the 10 recommendations again that we've already said we would do. Try to marry that up with some of these things that are in here so that when we get together, we can, you know, really start voting on some things and get through some of this stuff, you know? Because I think that's the only way we're gonna get to the bottom of this, is just start voting. And it could be something comes up, nobody wants it, okay, on to the next. Something comes up, nobody wants it, on to the next.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I just want to say within that, I still like what you said about the show of hands for some of them and how we could do that as a way to just represent where we would as a committee, if we're not, and you're saying that would be done in lieu of voting on specific things, so that it's shortening the process kind of instead of doing a formal vote.
Is that
That's
proper?
gonna be hard on the next one because it's completely virtual,
That's
so
correct.
that's probably easier to do if we're here
Yeah.
in person.
You can use the show of hand tool or the voting tool.
But not everybody can see it. So like a lot of times when I'm on that, I can't see what everybody else is
Well, I think
doing.
some of these motions could be organized in a way to make them quicker for the percentages. You could have a motion, should we raise the Apple percentages instead of, so there were motions,
I mean,
raise it for this, raise it for this, raise it for this. Just do one motion.
Lisa, would you want to get together and we can sit down and work on it? Yeah, I mean, this was just kind of like your brainchild and you kind of put this together, but we can work on this together.
My
And
main thing was
Yeah.
that I didn't want anyone to feel like they didn't get to make a single.
I understand. And I know you and Todd had talked about
Yeah.
this and that's, this is not
That's not
support
right.
without the support of the chair. And I know you and Todd have had a lot of conversations. And so
Yeah,
that's where
I
this
mean,
is coming
that's
about.
We're also listening to what the people said, called it spirit, and giving them a voice as well, which I think is appropriate.
Dan's been waiting here for a
Yes.
while.
When you did this, after we did the first APFA vote, you asked us to go back and look at motions and pull things. I pulled a bunch of mine. I don't know whether you
Yeah,
have the
I did
update.
too, but not
list.
everybody responded. And,
Okay.
yes.
You had
Let's
updated.
let Dan talk next.
Yes.
I don't know.
I was just gonna suggest, I don't know, Linda, if you know of any, but if there are things that are happening in other committees, people should be aware of those, because that might dwindle some of these, like in number 7, increased transfer tax. I can tell you there's HB 1450. That was talked about heavy. That report is coming out soon, so I would suggest reading that. I doubt it's gonna go anywhere in this community. So, but if there are other things that are happening somewhere else, that would be good to know, so we're not.
Oh, I was just gonna say, under number 1 on your list, you have me assigned to motion 26. That was a motion that I had included in the parking lot about trying to attempt to include preschool in local capacity. But I asked Linda to take that motion.
Sorry
off the
about that.
table.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so I just want to let you know
Thank you.
that I.
Yeah, we can get through and scrub this a little more.
The reason I did that was we had a whole robust conversation about why it's important that school system uses local capacity in the way that they do. That made me feel comfortable. That was the appropriate
Yeah.
motion to make. I do think that preschool could have an impact on the future, particularly with the blueprint. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty there. First,
There
like,
is a lot of uncertainty.
how many, it's optional, so how many students are actually going to go, and will it be in a private setting, or will it be required for public facilities? And then it's not like a one school to one school situation where every student is assigned to a, specific school, preschool rather. Like right now, you close a certain area under the APO test. Or under UPP, you would have a certain rate for a specific school, but the school system could handle preschool if they want to add seats on a regional basis. That wouldn't really jive with the APO system to close a specific area, to have a specific fee tied to that area. So I don't think it makes sense at this point to include preschool, so that's why I think I would do that motion, but I do think it might make sense at least. Like, I know we had kind of marching orders and recommendations from the last committee, the last APO committee, and I would think maybe for the next APO committee, that could be something that we recommend, that they look at preschool.
I'm gonna say that among the PTA council, absolutely, they want to deal with pre-K and pre-K capacity. And it is more complicated now with blueprint, it is more complicated with regional, but we already have regional tests in APO. It's been done before. It is actually being done right now. And as far as the hurry up bit, I've waited 10 years to get an opportunity to deal with these things. I'm the head of the building industry, building organization bulldozed my house in the middle of the last session. They stopped the session, got demo permits and did that to me. This is very important to me. We can get this done in the time frame allotted. Period.
Well, my goal was just to try to see how many, trying to get the maximum number of questions for other people so they could please in the limited amount of time we have left. So thank you, and thanks for asking for this. Thanks for asking.
Is there anything else anybody wants to bring before the committee, or do we have a motion to adjourn?
Can we just talk about what's gonna happen here? And so do we have to be done? What's our drop dead date? And how are we gonna get from today to that drop dead date for being done? Because I want to understand how we're gonna get it done. I think it's 2 months, right? It's sometime in
It's due in
August.
August.
Let's do it in August 4th.
So I would go back. I can't remember when our first,
August
August
4th?
24th,
20th.
28th. Yeah, so August 28th, so it's due before August
So we have the
28th.
end, to the
So
end
we
of
have
August.
a meeting in 3 weeks.
25th,
The 25th.
June 25th, and then July 9th
Right.
is our next meeting after that. We are beginning to put together the the report, which is going to be, kind of the history of where all this is and where you are with your recommendations. I know that Todd and I have spoken about the executive summary that he is going to be working on for where this is as of now. And then that's what will be presented forwarded to the county executive and the county council. Whether they choose to take it up as legislation, that will be up to them to decide what the next step is after we've presented and prepared and forwarded it to them.
But at some point before our final meeting, we will have what's close to a final draft. and be able to
100%.
Make comments. and-
Yes, my goal is to get that to you in July.
And I think so far we have 10 that we voted on, right?
Correct.
10 recommendations that we voted on. So now it's looking at what do we want to add to those 10 that we
Okay.
already have.
Okay.
It'll be a similar format and structure as to what the last APO report is. And then all of the supplemental stuff that we have shown you, that'll just be like an appendices, just so they can know, like the educational piece, that'll be supplemental, but it'll be composed of who's in the group, an executive summary, and then your recommendations. And then the votes, and then what the dissenting opposition discussions were on the side, just so that way we had recorded that as well.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Good question.
Thank you.
I'm sure everybody wants to know. Any other questions?
I have a quick one. If we don't have to be done until near the end of August, could we have a meeting in August that actually reviews the report and then use the meeting for more voting? Because if we don't do that, we only have one more voting meeting.
And that, I'll leave that up to the chair.
Well, there's no way, I mean, if the meeting in July is like July 8th, there's no way we're gonna have a report in hand well in advance of
I
July.
mean, I
8th.
think we could have, I mean, look, unless you're changing those 10 motions, I mean, that's, I mean, how much more is there to really add? I mean, I would hope we're not I mean, we can have a big bulk of a report done. And so, and I'm not saying it'll be done July 9th, but I would hope to get something to you sometime in July. I mean, I can't imagine there would be.
Yeah, but I mean, we have to have it to vote on it, right? To the final.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's going to have to be another meeting. It's.
We just haven't, I mean, with summer schedules and everything, so we just have not put forward that.
Okay.
I mean, we already added one meeting, so if you
Mhm.
need to add another one, then that's what has to happen, you know, so we've already added, because the next meeting was an addition, wasn't it?
The
Or was
25th,
this
and then
the-
our offices are closed for energy savings days. I don't know if you've heard a lot,
Yes, I
over
got
the
the
summer, yeah. So that's why the 25th is a virtual meeting, so,
But if we need to add more,
and we
No,
can
I'm just
talk,
saying, but so we're, I mean, it sounds like there's.
You
going
will
to
see,
be-
yes.
There's gonna be another one after July 9th.
absolutely,
Okay. It's just that July 9th is the last currently.
on the
scheduled.
schedule,
Yeah.
correct.
Good.
that's a big week.
Okay.
Anything else? Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Make that motion.
Second.
Everyone in favor, say aye.
All right.
All right, great. Have a nice